There are people here who spend all year waiting for today. People who care about this day as much as anything else in the world. For us, it's about pride in where we're from and who we are. And understanding that these 2 minutes are timeless.
Chad Summers, thank you very much for your time. Always value your opinion greatly, and having reflected very briefly at Maidan about the outcome of the 2023 renewal of the Kentucky Derby, I think we start in a place that we know so well, and that, of course, is Maidan. My particular experience was with a horse called Mubtahij, who won the UAE Derby with consummate ease and a common canter with Christophe Soumillon. He bumped a monster like American Pharoah, horses like Firing Line, Dortmund, and Frosted. So he was no match for them on that particular day. But you alluded to something before we actually got into this conversation about a horse that has won this year's UAE Derby, that has a very strong connection to yourself, that has been specifically prepared for this race, and he's currently on offer at 10-1.
We're going to have two horses from the UAE Derby. The first and third place finisher, Continuar, is also going to be in the race for Yahagi. Yahagi, obviously, the trainer of the world right now, winning Breeders' Cup races in Saudi and Dubai, and hot as can be. But it starts with Dermot Agaki for sure. You know, when you talk about Mubtahij and you talk about some of these other horses that have come along and made this journey to Kentucky to run in the Derby, it was almost like an after dinner mint. It was the icing on top of the cake. Whereas with Dermot Agaki, this has been their goal for a long time. Obviously, when they bought him, you can go back that far and say, well, the owner said the mother won at 2,000 meters, and Mind Your Biscuits, the father, was so fast, and wouldn't that be great to make it to the Kentucky Derby? Everyone says that when they buy a horse, though, right? But the thing is, with this horse, when he won the stake race back in last year at the end of his 2-year-old season, and he basically did it the right way, came from off the pace, made a big move, get up at the wire and a thrilling finish. The connection said, we want to go to the Kentucky Derby, and how are we going to do it? We're going to have an aggressive worldwide plan. We're going to go to Saudi Arabia, we're going to go to Dubai, and then we're going to come to America. And all credit to connections. It's gone about as good as can expect. In Saudi Arabia, he was a good third at a distance that was a little too short, just 1,600 meters. Went over to Dubai where he strengthened up, and he traveled so well from Saudi Arabia to Dubai. I think that can't be lost in all of this. And then he went to 1,900 meters with Christophe Lemaire for the first time aboard, and the rest is history, as they say. He's gone on now to Kentucky. He's been here for about 3 weeks, and obviously a lot of positive reports coming out of Churchill on how he's trained and how he's doing.
I thought that a horse like Mendelssohn won the UAE Derby as well as any horse could ever win the Derby. And I think Mubtahij as well. I think they won by 10 or 12 lengths and ever increasing margins. But these ground-eating monsters that arise out of the ground in America, do you feel that this horse of yours, because he has this American pedigree, being by Mind Your Biscuits, is going to be very well equipped to deal with these monsters?
The number one biggest difference is, Mind Your Biscuits never ran on the grass. He certainly had a dirt background. On the female side, the Grand Dam sire is Sunday Silence. So there is a lot of American dirt pedigree involved, whereas with the Mubtahij or Mendelssohn, maybe you can make the argument that maybe they were more of a grass-laden pedigree. And with Mendelssohn, look, Mendelssohn was brilliant that day in Dubai, but don't forget it was a sloppy track, which turf horses tend to excel at. And it's just different. Like he won the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. When he ran in the UAE Derby, that was his second start of the year. He had won an all-weather prep race for it. He wasn't really at his peak in the Kentucky Derby, whereas this horse has been prepared to peak on the first Saturday, May. And the one thing I can tell you, Andrew, for sure, is in going to these races for the years and years and years that I've done this, it's not necessarily always the best horse that wins the Kentucky Derby. It's the horse who's the best on that day. He might have to have the best trip, or he just may have to come into this. You can't have anything go wrong. The one thing that we've learned is if something goes wrong, if you get a fever, if you run a bad race, if anything that happens like that, it just, when your plans don't work out, that's when things go wrong. You need to have everything go right. And to the credit of Dermot Sadagaki, everything has gone right all year long. And so for that, I give him more of a chance, more of an opportunity than I would in the past of a Mendelssohn or a Move to Heaves, despite the fact that, yes, I mean, look, he won by 7 or 8 lengths. He just missed Mendelssohn's track record. But it was a different victory, I thought, than when Mendelssohn beat the Philly Raya back in 2018.
Okay, very, very well put. And the case is dismissed as far as his credentials are concerned. Now, with Mr. Baffert not in this particular race, whose horses tend not to have any problems, whether you're thinking of Justify, whether you're thinking of American Pharoah, whatever you're thinking about, the point is that Todd Pletcher seems to have just a few strong aces in his hand in this year's Kentucky Derby.
This year is probably the strongest 1-2 punch he's ever brought there. So to me, that's the thing that's really special is, look, there are guys, and Steve Asmussen, who we'll talk about in a second, who that's the only thing missing from his Hall of Fame resume is the Kentucky Derby victory. With Todd, this is what he does it for. This is why he's here. Forte is owned in part by Mike Rapoli, who wanted to win the Belmont Stakes, which he accomplished last year, running 1-2 with Mogul and Nest. Now he wants to win the Derby. Well, he bought 90 horses, 90 yearlings and 2-year-olds to try and make the Derby. And ironically enough, this is one of the cheapest one in Forte at just $110,000. He wants to be in the Derby. He wants to win the Derby. Todd wants to win the Derby. Everything that's on their mind throughout the course of the year is, how do we win the Kentucky Derby? And going to Churchill and being a part of morning training on Tuesday and watching these horses train, you can tell just from the physical, as far as the coat that they had and how they looked, to the mental ability and everything else where they were. Forte and Tapit Trice, and they're 3-1 and 5-1 for a reason. I get it. Their records speak for themselves, but they really did look a class above the rest of the field as far as how they looked in training. They really caught your eye. Couldn't be doing any better. Both looked a picture. And I would think that the race certainly goes through Todd Pletcher. I'm going to be very, very surprised if he's not holding up that Kentucky Derby trophy on Saturday night about 6:38 p.m.
It may be the part of Steve Asmussen's resume that is missing, but the Dubai World Cup is the part of Todd Pletcher's resume that is missing. And Steve Asmussen has that in his resume. So let's go to Steve Asmussen.
Look, this year was weird. We always tinker with this system for some reason. I don't know if you guys do this in South Africa and in other places of the world, but we can never figure out who the top 20 horses are that should qualify for this race. So we switched over to a point system about probably 8-9 years ago. And now we're adding points. You get points for fifth. It's almost like a player participation award. I'm surprised everyone doesn't get a ribbon. But at the end of the day, about 2 weeks ago, Steve Asmussen was looking as though he wasn't going to have a starter in the race. He had a couple of nice horses in Red Route 1 and Disarm, but they weren't going to have enough points to qualify. And so Steve Asmussen made a conscientious decision. He sent Red Route 1 to a race at Oaklawn, which he was a winner, that he is an automatic berth to the Preakness in 2 weeks' time. And he sent Disarm to Lexington. And all he had to do was finish 1, 2, 3, and he was going to qualify by 1 point over the next 3 or 4 horses on the list. And that's what he did. He finished third. I don't think it was a peak performance from him, but it was what he needed to do to get into this race. And since that race, albeit it's only been 2 weeks, he's really, really looked good. He's a son of Gun Runner, who's one of the best stallions, young stallions in America that was formerly trained by Steve Asmussen, ran second in the Dubai World Cup, won the Breeders' Cup. Distance shouldn't be a problem. He looks really good, and he's one at a big price that could get into the bottom of your tickets, exotics and trifectas, especially with jockey Joel Rosario, who will be patiently biding his time and looking for his spots.
There's a horse that we touched on very briefly, but he's got an absolutely faultless record. He's probably a little bit light on experience, but let's go to Jose Ortiz's mount, King's Barnes. He's at 12-1.
How do you argue with the horse who's 3 for 3, who's perfect in his career? The first race was good. He had a lot of traffic trouble, was able to overcome that. And the barn kind of jokingly says that he had 2 races in the stake of one, just the way that the race was broken down. But he ran well in that race. He stretched out to 2 turns in the second time out in Tampa Bay Downs, was a much the best winner on that day. And then went to Louisiana. And a lot of people are giving him a hard time saying, well, he went so slow, but he did what he was supposed to do. He's not a front runner by nature. It was just a race where nobody wanted to make the lead. And so he walked the dog. He went the first 800 meters in 50, and he went the 1200 meters in a minute and 15 almost. And nobody was coming to him. And you know what? When they set him down and they asked him to finish, he finished and he ran super. So it's tough to hold that against him. The only thing I'll say about King's Barn is he's light on experience with just the 3 career starts. Mage, also another buzz horse who's going to fall into this category, just 3 career starts. And he's not kind of filled out and looking like to win the Derby. I feel as though you need to just look the part. And in watching King's Barn yesterday, he looks good, and he looks like a horse who will have a very promising future, but he doesn't look like a Derby winner to me. He looks like a horse who just needs a little bit more seasoning, which I understand. He's done everything that's been asked of him, and he's done it perfectly, being 3 for 3. I just think he needs a little bit more.
A lot of people will be backing for various different reasons, not least of all that they think Angel of Empire is a horse that might have some kind of a connection to a flight, and that Flavien Prat is well suited to this ride.
He's an interesting horse. He everything he does, I don't want to say it's a surprise, but he doesn't act like in the morning time like he is this very special horse. He's very, very vanilla. He does what you ask him to do, nothing more, nothing less. But he's continued to improve. His last 2 races in the Risen Star Fairgrounds and the Arkansas Derby were a thing of beauty. And Luis Saez rode him in Fairgrounds and the Risen Star. And I said, man, this horse was just a great ride. Nobody else, if anybody else rode that horse, he wasn't going to win. I said, that was a great ride. And sure enough, he went to the Arkansas Derby. I didn't think he had much of a chance, had a new jockey, and he did the same thing and did it even easier. So he has to be looked at as a contender. But from that Brad Cox barn, there's 4 horses in the race that Brad has. He's going to represent a fifth of the field. And I got a feeling that I like a little Verifying in the 2-hole more than I like Empire. Look, if he wins, is it going to be a shock? Maybe not. Maybe you sit there and go, well, he was touting himself all year long, getting better and better. But I think Verifying has a little bit more talent. That's my opinion.
Okay, well, on that basis, why would we go anywhere else than horse number 2, Verifying, with Tyler Gaffalione aboard, after which we can talk about Practical Move and Ramon Vasquez.
Yeah, so with Verifying, talk about well-bred and an internationally based pedigree. Tyler Gaffalione made his international debut this year in Dubai. He won the Godolphin Mile on Isolate, so certainly a jockey who's riding on top of his game right now. And the pedigree, he's a half brother to the champion filly Midnight Bissu, who ran second. Maybe one day he'll be placed first in the first ever Saudi Cup, the $20 million Saudi Cup. So certainly she was a very special filly. This horse owned by Coolmore. Okay, so you can continue the international theme. So owned by the Coolmore family, and he trains as well as any horse can in the morning time. He's a little bit inconsistent in the afternoon. So he's a tough horse when you're laying down a bet or something on Saturday. Can you trust him? Maybe, maybe not. But you're going to get rewarded if you do. We think he's 15-1 right now, and I can see him drifting up a little bit. Or is he 30-1? Is he 15 or 30?
What, verifying?
Yeah.
He's 15, 1-5.
He's 15. I think he might kind of drift up a little bit. And he's one of these horses where one of these days he's going to put it all together. And I know you've been around horses like this before, Andrew, where, one of these days he's going to do it. And when he does it, it's not going to surprise anybody. And so can he do it on the grandest stage of them all with Tyler Gaffalione and the hot trainer Brad Cox? Absolutely. Is he going to be my top pick? No, but he is a definite must use for me at big odds. And when you talk about Practical Move, this is a horse that I loved at the 2-year-old in training sale. It's actually bred. This is bred by trainer Chad Brown. So Chad Brown can win the Kentucky Derby as a breeder before he can win the race as a trainer, which would be a pretty funny fact. But he's done nothing wrong since the winter time. He was a very impressive winner of the Cash Call Futurity, a small field in California. He's had dream trips in his 2 starts this year. The concern with him right now is since arriving from California, he's done very little at Churchill Downs. He wasn't seen for a couple of days. He came out this morning on Wednesday. He jogged one, stayed with the pony. We haven't seen a lot of galloping from him. So there's concern of where he's at from a soundness standpoint, or if everything's just fine. And this is Tim Yakteen's methods. We're not 100% sure. Tim Yakteen, he has the background to win this race, working for guys like Charlie Whittingham and Bob Baffert in the past. So you can say he knows what he's doing for sure. But this week you want to see them gallop. You want to see them moving with fluidity. And we haven't seen that yet from Practical Move.
Okay, it's a fair comment, but I have to ask you this. As a trainer, how important is the actual pre-race workout, whether it's a short burst over 400 meters, 2 furlongs on the Thursday, to get their PCR up? I mean, at the end of the day, it's about their red blood cell count. And surely, if all the hard work has been done in the preceding month or 6 weeks, is it that important to show people just how fast your horse can go during the week?
Well, when you take off your media hat, you put on your trainer hat, you say, who cares what the media says, right? You say, I know my horse and I prepared my horse and I'm going to go into this race, whatever I think is best for my horse. The one thing that I can say though, for sure, when I had Mind Your Biscuits as a sprinter, the week leading into the big race, we did very little. Very, very little. We'd have a gallop or two, just kind of a hack around, and then he would jog. He'd see the gates. He was cool in the paddock, but he wouldn't do much. You wanted to save and reserve as much energy as you could because you knew you were going to use it all in the race. With distance horses, though, I feel like it's a little bit more different. You want to be getting that air into their lungs. And while you can not have to push hard, you don't have to have a 400-meter blow like the Japanese might have, or an 800-meter work like Kenny McPeek did with Sun Thunder yesterday. But you do want to see him galloping. You do want to see them getting used to the track. That's the other thing. He's never been on this track before. He comes from California, the first time he ever left California. You want to see him moving and showing signs of good energy. If not, they don't have to. I agree with you that they don't have to go fast, but I do want to see them showing signs of good energy and using their bodies the right way and really getting a hold of the surface. I think that's important.
Well, you mentioned Kenny McPeek. He has the mantle of the saddest circumstance that I have ever seen any racehorse trainer endure in his life, with a 19-year-old woman that had chartered a plane to come to the Epsom Derby with a filly, or rather a filly that was running in the Oaks, that dropped a very, very famous French jockey on the way down to the start. It was the most riveting bit of television that I've ever seen, but the tears and the frustration of having come all that way to be such an important part of history, surely he deserves to get some kind of recompense for that.
No, I agree, and some would say that he's gotten it 10 spades in some of the races he's won since then. But no, look, you want to. This is what we do it for. And Kenny's certainly one that hasn't been afraid to put one on a plane and take a chance. And you got to love the competitor in him and in trying to take on those opportunities. But look, he's a Kentucky kid that would like to win the Kentucky Derby. He ran third the first time he ever ran in the Kentucky Derby. And I think this is something that he strives for, and he would love to win. And, he bought Curlin. A lot of people don't know that. He bought Curlin and was the original trainer of Curlin. Obviously, they ended up selling him to Steve Asmussen, and he ran third in this race. But he's been there before, had a couple of chances last year as well. He'd like to win, but Sun Thunder to me is a little bit on the outside looking in. Added the blinkers, has shown a little bit more kind of pizzazz, a little bit more pop and sizzle in his last two workouts since adding the blinkers, which he'll be equipped with on Saturday. But it's a tough road for him to climb. There's a lot of horses who he's run against already who have beaten him for him to win this time.
Okay, well, just a little bit of useless information. I seem to think in the back of my mind that the filly that Kenny McPeak took to Epsom Downs was a filly called Daddy's Little Darling. And the Oaks that year, I seem to recall, was won by a filly called Enable, who turned out to be one of the best fillies in the history of fillies. So I don't think he would have died when he would have beaten it.
If you want to make everything full circle, Andrew, Enable famously won her Breeders' Cup race at Churchill Downs. So everything comes full circle.
I love it. I absolutely love it. All right, so we've touched on the majority of runners that have some kind of a prayer in terms of their betting price. We've thrown in a couple of roughies like Disarm at 30-1 and Verifying at 15-1. Kenny McPeak's Sun Thunder at 50-1. We've covered all the favorites. Is there anything that you think we've left out? If I ask you for the moment of truth to narrow down 6 horses that we can pick up to make a quartet, which is finishing first, second, third, fourth. Let's find 6 horses that you think are the prime candidates to win this year's Kentucky Derby.
Right. So I think there's two, the two obvious ones you start with are Forte and Tapper Trice. They would be the two that would make the most amount of sense. Once you stretch out, then I would use Verifying as a horse who can pick up who can certainly pick up a piece. Wouldn't be a surprise to win the whole thing. I think you add in Dermis Adagaki from Japan, so that would give us 4. I would throw in Hit Show. Of course, we haven't mentioned from the Brad Cox barn, breaking from the inside from the rail. He's been involved in the last race in the Wood Memorial. The time was relatively slow, but the way they did it, and he got jostled around and bumped around, and he experienced that in that race, similar things to what he's going to experience on Saturday, where most of these horses have not had to. So I would include Hit Show. We'll make him our number 5 horse, and we'll round out the top 6 with Disarm.
Right, Mr. Summers. Finally, I don't know any trainer in the world other than John Gosden who is so immersed in the game, and there are probably many that I don't know. I don't know how you as a trainer manage to keep yourself abreast of all of these horses, even when you don't have a run in the race. It's an art, it's a science, it's a passion. What is it for Chad Summers?
Yeah, it's definitely a passion, right? I mean, I don't think you can look at what we do as a job. You just can't. I mean, if you're in this industry, you're in it for life. It's more than a drug. The feeling you get at the top of the stretch when it's one of your horses, or sometimes even from a punter's point of view, one of the ones that you've backed, and there's pride in saying, I picked this Derby winner or that Epsom Derby winner or Breeders' Cup or Arc de Triomphe or whatever. These races are what it's all about. To have a runner in this kind of race or to participate in any way, and when you're not in it, to watch closely and pay attention to those that are, to try and pick up and try and learn. what did they do? What kind of horse? Where did this horse come from? Is it a homebred, a yearling sale, a 2-year-old sale, a private purchase? You know, what races did they win to get here? And then to try and assimilate to be like them. And you say next year we will be there. Next year we will be in Kentucky. And you know, we were fortunate last year. A horse I was associated with in Cyberknife that we made it. We thought we had a chance and came up a little bit short on that day. He ended up winning the Haskell and had a nice career. He's now a stallion. And we were close this year with Instant Coffee and Slip Mahoney, who were one race away from just finishing first, second, and third and being there. It makes you want it. It makes you want to be there in the worst possible way. And, you know, it's sad being here in New York, even though we have, you know, a lovely barn full of horses. We'd love to be in the big race. And, you know, hopefully next year we'll have that opportunity, and we strive to be there every year. So, you know, definitely excited to see who's going to win, and hopeful for the opportunity to try and beat them down the road in another race.
Well, I know you will, because you didn't get to Maidan with Mind Your Biscuits by accident twice. And I must just tell you very briefly that my wife sponsored a young lady in her mid-20s that had never won a big event in her life. And she won the biggest event that called the Easter Festival, the Grand Prix, on a 15.1 hand, small little pony against 800,000 euro giants. So the David and Goliath story and the dreams do come true. And we're very privileged to have your time. And we're looking forward to seeing you, Chad Summers, back in the big time sooner than later. In the meantime, keep on being who you are, the giving kind, really, really on the ball person that you are. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it, Ponsky. Thank you so much.
All the very best. Are you, by the way, are you heading to Churchill Downs again for the Kentucky Derby, or will you watch it from New York?
I think I'm going to watch it from New York. Our friend from Dubai, Salim bin Gadea, he's in the Oaks with me because Kaczynski asked me if I was going to go back. I'd like to, but I think I'll end up here. But you never know. With me, I might show up anywhere. Maybe I'll show up in Cape Town sooner or later. We'll find out.
It'll be a lot cheaper than going to Churchill Downs, I can assure you.
Looking forward to it.
Over and out. All the very best. Thank you.
A curious person might ask, in these uncertain times, what is the meaning of the Kentucky Derby? And the answer comes back. In racing, the Derby is everything. It is as big as Churchill Downs, and as small as the tear that rolls down a winner's cheek. It is as broad as a bluegrass paddock, as close and chaotic as 20 thoroughbreds barreling into the first turn. It is a party with mint juleps, hunchbeds, and hats. And it's when a sport takes stock of itself, as racing did a year ago after dozens of horses had fallen. The Derby is but a single day, but the Derby is also every day. The Derby is why dreamers spend millions on yearlings, leaning into the longest shot in sports. The Derby is why trainers rise every day in darkness to work a 2-year-old who might just be special. The Derby is why a barn becomes a dream team, all supporting the big horse. Derby Day is when racing awakens as one, like a child at Christmas. It is the day when kings and commoners share a passion, from the red carpet to the clubhouse to the infield. Late in the afternoon, they walk together from the barns to the paddock. Grooms on the shank, millionaire owners by their side. The air crackles with anticipation as horses are saddled. Kentuckians weep for their song. Fans everywhere hold their breath as the starting gate is loaded.
They're all in line. We're ready for the start. They're off in the Kentucky Derby.
Just more than 2 minutes later, the champion wears roses.
American Pharoah has won the Kentucky Derby.
Sometimes that champion is the greatest of all time, and history is made.
Secretary just broke the old Kentucky Derby record.
Sometimes he is a hopeless long shot who writes a fairy tale.
Has won the Kentucky Derby.
And sometimes the outcome takes not 2 minutes, but 22. And here, the question is answered. 2 minutes, a day, a year, a lifetime, forever. That is the meaning of the Kentucky Derby.